Okay, I think we will make a start. Good evening. My name is Rebecca, and I'm here on behalf of Medic Mind to present to you the definitive guide to medicine interviews. And I will hand over to our host, Hamza.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Hamza. I'm a final year medical student at the University of Glasgow, and I'm here today to talk to you guys about the first part of medical interviews, and we're going to focus today on um, kind of skills questions and personality and work experience questions, questions that inherently are the bread and butter of your medicine interviews. So in the chat, can everyone put a kind of 1 to 10 scale of how confident they currently feel if tomorrow they had an interview, how confident would they feel in answering some of the questions? 1 being not confident at all, and 10 being I'm super ready to smash this interview. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm totally there. So good mix so far. Thank you everyone who's commenting. So somewhere between 4, 5, 6, and 7 is common. Most people kind of in that range, probably meaning that you've covered or you've looked at some of the topics in an interview, but you're maybe not sure how to structure an ideal answer or a model answer. And you're not sure exactly how to build the confidence in order to answer those questions in a really effective way to make sure you're communicating clearly your skills and strengths in preparation to an interviewer. So today we're going to be talking about the why medicine question and the skills question, both of which are kind of key bread and butter questions for your medical interviews. We're also going to be talking about how we what techniques we can use to present ourselves in a well to an interviewer and deliver kind of information clearly. And we're going to talk about some of the mistakes to avoid and common pitfalls, and we're going to do that through model answers essentially. So let's talk about why medicine. So why medicine is one of the probably a question you'll be asked across every one of the interviews you do because the universities want to know why you're there. Why are you sitting there? What is your passion and what is the reason behind why you've chosen to pursue a career in medicine or in dentistry? So we're going to look at some example answers and how to approach the question. But generally, my 2 tips to a why medicine question is to give a chronological, honest response. So show how your passion has evolved through time as you've developed your experiences and spent more time around healthcare professionals and in healthcare settings. The other thing you want to do is you want to show passion. And the way to do that is by highlighting stories and experiences that have clearly shown why you want to pursue this career. The best examples of those are personal stories. So interactions you personally have had with healthcare professionals. And that usually could either be from your own experiences or family experiences of healthcare. Those are really good, but those by themselves aren't necessary. Experiences on your work experience are really, really effective because they are taken from your viewing of interactions between doctors and patients, which is an inspirational kind of way of showing doctors at work, essentially. And the other type of experience that would be really good for this question is experiences through your volunteer work. So have you spent time volunteering at care homes or with patients with adaptive and difficult communication needs? Because showing that you've got the skills of adapting your communication is really important, but at the same time, showing the empathy and showing that you have a caring nature is also really important in this question. But experiences by themselves aren't going to make your answer. Reflecting on what you've learned is really, really important. And later on, we're going to talk about something called the Gibbs free the Gibbs reflective cycle, where we talk about the skills to make an effective reflection on a process or on a scenario. So let's take a look at this model answer to the question, why medicine? Do we think that this is good or not good, and why? So put your answers in the chat. So say good or not good, and give a sentence maybe explaining why you think this is good or not good. Give you 2 minutes to do that. Alternatively, rather than saying good or not good, try and give this answer a score out of 10. Try and say that from a scale of 1 to 10, where would this answer place? Where one would be an answer that would actively encourage you not to go into medical school, like actively encourage someone to think that person was not suitable, and 10 would be an answer that would be perfect and show all of the skills required. So we've got a couple of people who are saying not good. Yeah. 4 out of 10, no chronology and no passion for medicine. 5 gives some reasons but doesn't show passion. 4 out of 10s, motivation seems mostly limited. Yeah, so I would agree with that. I think the challenges of this question are it does highlight some of the benefits of a career in medicine objectively. I mean, it is a prestigious job. Challenging yourself academically isn't particularly a problematic thing to say. The opportunity to earn good money potentially might indicate that your motivations are probably not as altruistic. They may be a little bit focused on the financial benefits of medicine, and potentially, that might not be as realistic in the modern NHS or in the modern medical system. The other thing is that the other issue with this question answer is it doesn't give you any examples. So one of the big things that we want to do is we want to show examples of times that you have been inspired by specific doctors or healthcare professionals. And this question doesn't really do that at all. It doesn't give you any particular examples or any kind of stories or any reflections on their own experiences that would probably highlight to me that they're a good candidate. So probably a not good answer. Okay. What about this one? Do we think so? Again, same principle, scale of 1 to 10, 1 being this is an active concern for me, and 10 being this is a perfect answer. This would be someone who would be a very, very good candidate for medical school. To this question, why medicine? What do we think? Good or not good, and why? So people are saying 8 out of 10, good, good. It reflects on the experiences. Better than the last one. I would agree it's definitely better than the last one. 7, specific insight into the medical field. Now, if you were to 2 stars and a wish this, what do you think I would say as a potential interviewer, what do you think my wish for this answer would be to take this really to the 10 out of 10? But it only shows insight and not passion. I think it does show passion. I actually don't think it shows insight as well. Um, and I don't think it's specific enough to show insight. Yeah, reflection isn't really there. So this is a better answer. The issue is there's no chronology. Something has happened to this person at the age of 16 that has convinced them that they want to do medicine, but they've actually not explored that interest any further. Remember, by the time they're applying to medical school, they're going to be maybe, 17, maybe 16 and a half to 17. Um, and therefore they might have missed an opportunity to show how their passion has developed over a period of time. And that's probably as important. So building from this I think is a good beginning because they've reflected on the insights that they've gained from that experience. They've reflected on the intricacies that they've learned. A bit vague, probably could explore that a little bit. But they've reflected on some of the aspects of medicine that they think they would enjoy, i.e., the passion-driven yet intellectually engaging environment of medicine. And I think that's quite good. I don't like this though. I don't like the and have had a dream of going to medical school since young. I love medicine. Why? I think if you'd cut this sentence out, this answer would still work and flow in the same way. So I don't think you need a sentence like that. And I think so starting from here, the beginning of a good answer, but it needs a little bit more to take that to the next step where they reflect on some of the things they saw in their work experience. They reflect on maybe a book or two that they've read, because again, there's no actual requirement for you necessarily to have done clinical work experience in your application to medicine. I mean, it's good, but no specific requirement. and therefore reflecting on potentially a book that they've read, or a TV program, or a documentary that they've watched, or a virtual work experience that they've done. All of those are equally good experiences that they've had, but there's no indication of having done those things. And so it's a good answer, but it's lacking a little bit. It needs to take it to that next step. You need to think about how you built from your initial interest and your initial experience. Okay, so that leads us to probably a kind of you-led a discussion. So let's brainstorm what we would include in a model answer to this question together. So everyone chuck things into the chat, and we'll put it all together to build a model answer from the beginning, or things I would definitely recommend including. So could I please show you the structure again? So I don't really have a structure. Remember, these questions aren't inherently one structure. But I always talk about showing a chronological response. So start at the beginning of your interest, reflect on that, and then talk about what that led you to do, and then talk about what that led you to do. And then we'll talk about the Gibbs reflective cycle in a moment, towards the end of this as a final. But let's brainstorm what I think is really important here. So helping people. Okay. So if I say I want to help people, what do I need to do then? If I have led on to that, what do I want to do? I want to do two things. So if I talk about, yeah, so people are talking about them, work experience. So I want to show how doctors have done that. So that's usually through work experience. And then I want to show how I developed an interest of helping people. And that's usually through or volunteering or extracurriculars. So you could say that ever since an example sentence that would actually be quite good is you could say, when I was 16, I helped take part in a mentorship program at my school where I was supporting younger years who were struggling with Key Stage 3 maths and science to develop their maths and science abilities. I learned adaptive communication, and I saw the joys of helping people. This then led me to look at a career in which helping people was an important part of the job, and medicine came up as an interesting aspect to that, which led me to go and do work experience at a hospital, and in which I saw a doctor helping a patient on a ward round. The patient was struggling with a side effect of a medication that they'd been given. The doctor listened to the patient, took all of that into account, and prescribed a different medication that would have had a lower and different side effect profile, which would have supported the patient to help reach their healthcare goals and live independently. So you can see how what I've done is I've talked about my personal attribute, or the things that I want to gain out of a career in medicine, but I've linked that to a specific experience that I got, which has inspired me further. Now, I agree with the also talk about some of the challenges. So I looked at someone here, show them that medicine is challenging and difficult at times. So I actually like talking about the challenges of medicine. I think what you need to show to an interviewer is that you have insight. And insight means you have an understanding of what medicine as a career is going to be like. It's not going to be roses. It's not going to be all flowers and sunshine. It is tough. There's, challenges with the modern NHS. There's a lot of challenges with bureaucracy. There's a lot of challenges with, pay. There's a lot of struggle with waiting lists, experiences, challenging patients. There can be a lot of challenges with working in healthcare. So you have to show an understanding of that. And you can do that in two ways. The best way to do that, or the way most people tend to do an understanding to the challenges question, is through "this is going to hurt." Adam Kay's book is notoriously negative. I I joked about it. I read the book when I was in my third year of medical school. Um, and I think if I'd read it before I'd started medical school, I'd have had a longer thought about going to medical school. It's a very negative book, but it's a realistic book. It talks about the challenges of healthcare. I mean, there is inspirational aspects to the book, but he talks a lot about the challenges of working in healthcare. And so it's quite a good book where you can reflect on the challenges of healthcare. but you can also do that through your work experience. Give me an example of a time you saw a doctor-patient relationship being challenging, or a time you saw a struggle with some sort of aspect of the healthcare system, because you'll have seen all of those things. You should talk about those things. And then when you talk about those things, reflect on why you still want to do medicine despite those things. So even though you talk about the challenges, don't leave it as a challenge. Spin it on its head and reflect on what you learned that doctors need to do to overcome those challenges. Patient-doctor relationship being unique, improving lives, science, yeah, caring for others and lifelong learning, all of those parts. So whenever you talk about any kind of skill, whatever you're going to talk about, so any other skill, I would go back to that kind of aspect. So I would talk about why you've shown that that skill is important to you from your life. And that would be something in school, something from your work experience, something from your co-curriculars. And then why that skill is important for doctors, or why that aspect of medicine is important for doctors to show, and that you reflect on through your work experience. So my general structure would be highlight a reason or a factor that has made you want to do medicine, highlight what that has developed in you chronologically, and then highlight how you have also gone off and developed that same kind of aspect and part of your life. Um, how long should an answer to this question be? I would say about 3 minutes. Always aim for 3 minutes per answer. That's a good way to see if they have follow-up questions. So usually in a 5-minute MMI station, we might have loads of follow-up questions for you. But focusing in on that would be about 3 minutes is probably a good goal. Do you think you should read a book about medicine before interviews? I think you should always read books about medicine as much as you can. I mean, there are some really good ones. My personal recommendations. So This Is Going to Hurt. It's pretty good because it reflects on the challenges specifically in the NHS. What's it called? Breath, something. I'll get it up before the end. But it's a book by a American neurosurgeon, which is really hopeful and actually the opposite of This Is Going to Hurt. Let me just check my Kindle account, actually. Probably have all of these books saved. So checking that's When Breath Becomes Air. That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's a book by an American neurosurgeon, and it's a lot more hopeful, and it talks about the nature of medicine. Obviously, in America, it's very different, the healthcare setting. So you probably couldn't reflect on the challenges of medicine from that book, or challenges the UK healthcare system from that book, but you definitely can reflect on parts of medicine because medicine is often universal. So that's a good book to also focus on. And then Admissions: A Life in Brain Surgery is also a really good book. Henry Marsh there, he's a little bit older, as an older generation of medical professional. So he often talks about things that are a little bit more outdated in a way. I mean, he talks about his reflections from working in the NHS in the 70s and 80s. But again, it's still quite a hopeful book on healthcare. So why medicine? So the key tips and tricks for preparing for this kind of question is reading the opening to your personal statement, because you've already written this. You've written the answer to why medicine as question 1 of your personal statement. So read that and have it in your mind. Create a timeline of your experiences. So try and think about things chronologically as much as possible. And then reflection, reflection, reflection. So Gibbs reflective cycle. So whenever you talk about a scenario or anything that you're doing, the way you talk about that is through the 6 stages: description, feelings, evaluation, analysis, conclusion, and action plan. I'll give you an example through a made-up scenario. When I was on the ward, I saw a patient-doctor interaction in which the patient was often getting quite aggressive at the doctor. This made me feel quite anxious about working in healthcare, and it made me feel almost quite persecuted by the patient's experiences. It was a tough situation. When I evaluated the way I responded to the patient, so when I responded to the patient, I realized that I was also raising my voice at the patient in response to the patient raising their voice at me. And I could feel myself becoming more angry. To analyze that, I think that this was an inappropriate response to a difficult patient interaction. And it actually led to a worsening of the patient healthcare partnership, and it led to a worsening of the interaction between me and the patient. To improve, I'm going to work on remembering when to step back from patient interactions. If I can feel myself getting more annoyed, and if I can feel myself getting more angry, even if I'm feeling quite attacked, I will remember to step back from the patient interaction as I understand that it won't be as helpful to stay in that situation. Remember to talk to my colleagues and process and debrief difficult patient interactions and speak to senior support to make sure that I feel emotionally prepared to speak to the next patient. That's probably a good example of how you would use the Gibbs reflective cycle to talk about an example scenario in which you had a difficult patient interaction, for example. But you could use that cycle to talk about anything. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to hand back to Becca, who will talk a little bit more about the interview support that we have to offer.
Thanks very much, Hamza. As we take you through the different tips and tricks from Hamza, if you are feeling a little bit overwhelmed and you're still feeling like you're a bit of a 5 and 6 and your interview's coming up, don't forget that we do have medicine interview support that is tailored for all your needs. So that includes bespoke one-to-one tutoring, where you can talk to our tutors who have been through the same medical interview in the same university as you have, and they can give you more of an indication as to what that interview entails and give you some personalised tips and strategies, as well as giving you feedback on answers. You can do mock either MMIs or panel interviews. We also have MMI live days, which will take you through a mock MMI style interview, and it also comes with feedback on your answers that you can reflect on afterwards and use in your further preparation. If talking to people online and live isn't for you, we do have an online course which is full of tutorials that takes you through questions like Hamza is doing. So it will take you through your personality and skills questions, reflecting on data and data analysis. It will also take you through the structure of the NHS, talking about your work experience, and it will give you further information and different questions that you can practice on there. And if reading another book is what you'd like to do, we do have available on Amazon and also as an ebook our Master the MMI interview, which will take you through, again, the different aspects of the medicine interview, how to answer them, tips and tricks, including using these different cycles and techniques to formulate your answer, and it will give you good and poor responses to your answers so that you can measure your own responses to that.
Perfect. Thank you. And if you guys have any questions for Becca as well, just put them in the chat and she'll be able to answer them at the end. Right. So we're now going to talk about the opposite kind of technique to reflecting on experiences. And we're going to look at the STAR approach, but through the lens of skills and work experience questions. So this is another very common MMI interview question where you're going to be asked to either talk about personal strengths and weaknesses, or you're going to be asked to talk about experiences that you've gained from your work experience, or you're going to be asked about skills that you are needed to be a successful doctor or dentist. It's a really broad range of questions, but actually the approach is pretty much the same. The STAR approach is a really good way of talking about any experiences that you've had or any challenges that you've experienced and how that has supported your development. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, result, and reflection. So situation, what happened? Task, what did you have to do? Action, what did you actually do? Rather than what did you have to do? Because often there can be a difference between what you had to do and what you actually did. The result, what actually happened? What was the outcome? And then reflection, if the thing that you had to do was different from the thing you did, how did that affect the result? What did that teach you for next time? About the situation if you were in the same situation, or what did you gain to take away for different situations? So why is this important? Because essentially talking about experiences by themselves to a medicine interviewer means nothing. They do not they're not interested that you did loads of cool things. And actually, if you haven't done that many like cool things or whatever, people often talk about the pressure of needing to go into medical interviews, and you're talking about people, some of the people who are colleagues with you are going to be Olympic level runners or Olympic level athletes, and are also going to medical interviews. But actually, the experiences that they've had are actually the same level of meaningful as the experiences that you've had. And if you can reflect on your experiences better, then you've shown that you are more developed, more introspective, and probably a better candidate. So reflection is more important, because we need to understand why the skills that we have developed are useful for us to become better as doctors or dentists in the future. So that's kind of the crucial crux to what this question is asking you, is why are your skills important for you to be a successful doctor or dentist? Okay, so let's talk about this answer. So what do we think? Good or not good? Give a number out of 10 and why. Okay, people are saying kind of good, no reflection. Good, 6 out of 10 lacking in reflection. 5 out of 10 not really showing how they've developed skill specific situation would be better. Yeah, I actually think this is better than I think people are quite critical. 8 out of 10 could come off arrogant as it says that this will serve me well as a doctor. I disagree. I would disagree with that. I think this is kind of a good sentence structure to that answer. I mean, you can say this will serve me well. I don't think it does come across as arrogant personally. Um, but I think it is missing something. I think this is again a really good beginning. But my question that I am asking is this will serve me well as a doctor, a career in which may manage teams in lots of settings. How do you know this? How do you know this and why? Those are the two questions I'm asking myself at the end of this question. So talk about if you had ended this and you talked about on my work experience, I saw a doctor, I saw the work of an anesthetist in a surgical setting. I saw how the anesthetist had to coordinate a large multidisciplinary team of scrub nurses, surgeons, other doctors, registrars, people from all varieties and walks of life, and the anaesthetist was coordinating them to ensure a smooth flow of the operation. That would show me, as an interviewer, that you've identified a skill that's really important in medicine. You've identified why you know that skill is really important in medicine, and then you've identified why you think you've got that skill. Because essentially, interviewers are going to listen to 300 interviews a day, right? And so they're not really, I mean, they're kind of listening to you, but they're also a little bit zoned out. It's mid-afternoon and they're very tired at this point. They're human beings too. And what they want to know that you are able to do is you're basically able to say, I think I'll be a good doctor because I've seen what a good doctor does. And then I went off and did the same things that a good doctor does. Because if I've seen what a good doctor does and I go and do the same things that a good doctor does, then a medical interviewer kind of goes, well, surely by that we can put 2 and 2 together and say you'd make a good doctor because you've gone and done the same things that a good doctor does, and you know what things makes a good doctor does, what sort of things make a good doctor. Someone said 5 out of 10 too vague, only mentioned strengths and not any weaknesses. I think it's because I've not identified what the question was for this question, but the interview question for this was, can you outline why leadership, or can you outline some of your strengths, in and why they would make you a good doctor, for example. This isn't a weaknesses question. We'll talk about weaknesses later on. They're slightly separate question type entirely. But yes. Okay. Do we think that this is a good answer? So this would be a same question. Maybe this question would be, why is Why is teamwork important in healthcare? This might be the question. So again, similarly, put an answer down and then so number 1 out of 10, and then a bit of reason. Could be more reflective. Yeah. And doesn't, yeah, I think the big issue is it doesn't link to healthcare so far. I think it's quite good at reflecting on a particular scenario, and what they did. It probably hasn't given enough of an action or a result. Um, so yeah, I think it's the beginning of a good answer. But again, taking this further, I think what this person should have done is they probably should have added in a little bit about what actually happened. What was the scenario? Because they've said my strength was design and marketing, so I focused on making posters, no person and someone sending emails out for our blog. But then what was the outcome? What was the goal? What was the outcome? And then what was different? How would they have changed that the next time? So there's no real reflection on that. I guess there is a little bit here where you can complete activities more efficiently based on each team member's strength, potentially a form of reflection. But again, I need a little bit more meat on that. And I need a link to healthcare. So again, the beginning of a good answer, but remember these answers are going to be a lot longer than this. This probably is a 30-second answer. Your answer should be about 2 to 3 minutes for a good question. So again, add in bits on how this links to medicine, how this is kind of why this is important, and what the actual reflections on that. So would answers typically be free form, approximately 5-minute monologues? Pretty much. Unless you're at a panel interview, so unless you come up to Glasgow and do an interview here, where it's a panel and it's essentially a chat, and it's not really a free form monologue. Most MMIs do essentially end up feeling like free form monologues. In some MMIs, from my recollection, Bristol's MMI, which I did, they didn't even ask you the questions directly. The questions are on a printed sheet. You read the questions, you had a minute to read the questions, and then you just started speaking and was almost a free form 5-minute monologue. So kind of different styles of interviews have lean to different things. If you go to Oxbridge, their interviews are going to be conversations. You're expected to ask questions, and the interviewers will reply things back to you. So kind of it is very interview specific and interview dependent, but most MMIs do end up sounding a bit like 5-minute monologues. So let's brainstorm a model answer for this question. So what would you include in a model answer to what is your biggest strength? Yeah, so confidence versus arrogance. I think it's always better to lean more to the side of confidence, because they're already asking you a question that is inherently positive. If it was the biggest weakness question and you said, my biggest weakness is nothing because I am perfect, that's arrogance because the question is leading inherently to a negative. Whereas this question is inherently leading to a positive. So it can be a little bit more challenging to sound very arrogant in this question, I think. Um, so yeah, what is the strength? Yeah, identify. So that's probably step one, identify your strength. Two, link with personal experience. So how have you shown that? That's really important. And again, the way we would do that is through a star to a specific situation, task, action, result, and reflection that highlights your biggest strength. And then why is that important for a doctor to show? And that you link back to your work experience. And so that's pretty much the 3 steps to answering any skills question. Oh, so why is that important? And then you link that to your work experience. And if you do that correctly and efficiently, that would be a model answer. So if I said, what is your biggest strength? And you went to me, and you came back to me and you said, "Hi, thanks for interviewing me. I think my biggest strength is my ability to be a good leader." When I was in year 12, I took part in a Gold Crest Award project with a group of my team, with a team, which included a lot of my friends. Our task was to investigate antimicrobial resistance using common allopathic homeopathy remedies. We were working on doing kind of initial research, background research, planning an experiment, and then doing the experiment, and then coordinating our results. We needed different people to do each of the different parts to the project in order to collate together to form a poster, which we were then going to present. Um, someone in the beginning, we were actually struggling to find people who would contribute to each individual part and separating our team into the individual sub teams. But I was able to take a leadership role and help delegate tasks to individual people based on their strengths, which helped create mini sub teams that was able to take all parts of the project and do each part of the project in an efficient way. As a result, we were able to finish the project 3 months earlier than expected, and we were able to present the poster at a high standard and score a good mark on the poster. To reflect on this, taking a leadership role was really important in this team, and often because the team was made up of people who I would have considered my friends, I didn't initially think we would need a direct and active leader. But actually, taking on a leadership role here was really important because it showed that even teams that would normally work together quite well, of people who were very similar and who got along, without direction, people would not have ended up contributing, and we would have had parts of the project that would have been deficient and wouldn't have had enough people on it. Leadership is really important in medicine because doctors need to be able to lead to ensure that effective patient care is taken um, is taken into account. When I was on my work experience, I was in a multidisciplinary team meeting, and I saw doctors take the role of chairing that meeting to ensure that every member of the multidisciplinary team got a chance to speak, which meant that the patient's care was as holistic as possible, and it took into account the opinions of different people with different specialties. And that is kind of all you need to do. And if you do something like that, you've written an almost perfect answer to that question. Um, what do you think the best qualities is to mention for this question? So I always talk about the big five skills in medicine. So communication, teamwork, leadership, empathy, and organization. If you talk about any of those five strengths, those are really easy to talk about, some sort of medical equivalent to them. So those are probably the big five that I would normally talk about. Biggest weakness is the opposite of that. Another common question, make sure the weakness is real. A lot of people, I also help mark some of the MMI circuits that Becca was telling you about earlier. And you get a lot of people come up with things like, my weakness is that I'm too perfectionistic. It just shows a lack of insight into your own challenges and your own deficiencies. No one's perfect. Everyone's got weakness. I really struggled with public speaking when I was kind of in year 12. In your position, I was really anxious and really struggled to get my words out clearly. Um, I'll do that at the end. But I really struggled with public speaking, and that would have been an open and honest weakness to talk about. But then talking about progress, you always want to talk about how you're working on that on that weakness. So one of the big things I did was I ran for head boy in the year that I was in high school. And that job and that role involved a lot of public speaking to people to entire school assemblies. And actually that helped me overcome some of my fear of public speaking. And by the time I got to interview, I'd already talked about that I had a weakness that was public speaking. I really struggled with that. But I'd already started working on progress to that to kind of get over that. And actually the STAR approach can really help with showing how you're making progress towards accomplishing your goal. Um, Obviously, also make sure your weakness is not anything that would disqualify you from a medical career. I once heard it was at Mark MMI. I was running for Friends in Glasgow, and someone had come up with the biggest weakness and said, I think they had said something like, "Oh, I don't have any empathy." And I was like, that's something that would actively disqualify you from a medical career. So don't talk about that. Make sure your weakness is honest and make it open. But at the same time, there's often a challenge with a weakness that probably would not be appropriate for a medical professional to have. Okay, we're not going to talk about this question, just in the interest of time, just making sure that yeah. So in the interest of time and the fact that I want to run a bit of a Q&A at the end, we're not really going to model this question, but actually when you're doing a question like this, the big way to do that is the STAR approach. So tell me about a time you made a mistake and what happened. The STAR approach would really help with that because you could talk about a situation, talk about an action, talk about how you talk about a task and the fact that your action and your task were different, i.e. you did something differently from what you needed to do, you did something differently. That led to a non-ideal result. And then you can reflect on what you would have done next time or what you did differently or what skills you worked on to help make sure that that doesn't happen again. Poor communication. So how do you want to come across in an interview to seem like an ideal candidate? The big thing I would do for any MMI circuit is introduce yourself. So the best thing to do is to break the ice with the interviewer. So even just a quick like, hi, my name's Hamza, and thank you for having me at this interview. Just at the beginning of every station, just shows it breaks the ice and it shows simple politeness to an interviewer. It creates good rapport with your interviewer. Think about your tone, your rate, and your rhythm. So whenever you're practicing interview questions, interviews are going to be very anxious days and circumstances for you guys. So when you're thinking about your interview technique, try and speak about 30 to 50% slower than what you would normally expect to be speaking at. So mentally, you're going to sound like you're speaking really slowly. Remember to enunciate every word that you're saying, because without us noticing, when we're anxious, we just end up speaking slightly faster than we would normally speak, even without us expecting or noticing that. So just aim for 30 to 50% slower than you normally would expect. Right. So key takeaways. We focused today on just an overview of both of these core types of questions. We talked about core strategies for success and what we can use to practice those questions. We talked about both the STAR approach and Gibbs reflective cycle, and we gave you guys example questions and how you might begin to answer both of them. And I showed you examples and model answers for both of those questions. So essentially, upcoming webinars. Got another one coming up on the 19th of November. There we're going to talk about ethics questions, which are really common as well. We're going to talk about core knowledge you need. We're going to talk about how to find core knowledge and how to read up on things that you probably want to be aware of in preparation. Remember, hot topics do come up in interviews. So things like the NHS strikes are going to come up. So we'll talk a little bit about those. So we're going to talk about a little bit about empathy, ethics, and we're going to talk a little bit about kind of NHS hot topics, and just making sure that you come across well at interview. So probably the other side of interviews. Oh, there's a bit of a feedback form. Becky, do you want to explain this quickly?
Yeah, thanks, Hamza. So we do have a feedback form for this webinar. If you scan the QR code, it will take you to the form. If you can fill it in, that would be great. It does help us to refine and hone what we're doing in these free webinars. And also, obviously, for the 19th of November, if there was anything that a lot of you said, I'm sure Hamza could possibly include it in his next webinar on the 19th. You are going to be in for a chance of winning a one-to-one career coaching session with one of our tutors. So that could be talking about your medicine interview. Doesn't have to just be medicine in general. But yeah, scan the QR code, please, if you can, and fill out the feedback. That would be great.
Perfect. So I'll do a bit of a quick, I'll do a bit of a chill Q&A. So shoot questions in the chat. I'll keep an eye on the chat and answer as much as I can. So, how long would I spend prepping for an interview? I think general interview prep, I would probably start about now. And I think trying to get yourself actually to as many live interviews as much as you can. I mean, your schools might do some. Obviously, the MMI circuits that we run are they're very good. They're very high quality. And trying to get yourself practiced and tested on your interviews because it's as much confidence as it is knowledge. The knowledge isn't very difficult to find. I mean, there are loads of places and lots of resources available where all of that information, the core content and knowledge you need for an interview, but actually speaking it out loud and getting to grips with saying it to people is the most important thing that you can do. So I would probably say start about now, and then probably the day before an interview that you have, read up on that university, read up on the unique parts of that university's course, and then you can go in with knowing that you're confident. Which questions would you should be the star structure as opposed to Gibbs cycle? So Gibbs cycle, I think, would be mainly when you're reflecting on general topics or general skills. A star approach is for specific situations. I think that's the difference. So Gibbs is when you're talking about a more broad, um, a more broad concept or a more broad skill or a more broad challenge. Star is more for specific scenarios. Do you think for weaknesses, overanalyzing before acting is okay? Yeah. But again, if you can talk about something that you've done to help to kind of work on that is the most important thing. Can I please send the slides? Unfortunately, I don't have the slides, like I can't send them, but the recordings will be available. And so you can have a look at the slides through there. Are interviewers wary of over-prepared robot responses? Yeah, a lot. And so kind of hand gestures and general communication to make your answers seem not as over-prepared. The other way to do that is to remember structure to answers rather than remembering specific answers. And that's probably the better way to do it if you remember things that are really important to make sure you're mentioning. So remember the star approach or remember Gibbs cycle. And then when you go into an interview, kind of build your own answer on the day, but build it with the structures that you have in mind. When you use an experience or an example in a question, can the same experience be used again for another question? Yeah. Yeah, you can, because you can get multiple things out of one experience. So for both panels and for MMIs, you can talk about the same experiences because you can have got multiple things out of one experience or one story. Recording will be emailed to us. Yes, should be, if you put your email down. Will the questions in a dentistry interview be similar? They will be similar to a medicine interview, and they'll focus on the same skills. There might be differences in the ethical scenarios might be slightly different, but actually they'll be very, very similar. And the general knowledge and things that you need to know will be very similar. How many questions might there be per station? One core question, and then interview dependent, length of time dependent number of follow-up questions. So an interview like Exeter, which is 7 3-minute interviews or 3-minute stations, there may be no follow-up questions, or there may be one follow-up question just in case someone gets through it too quickly. An interview like maybe Bristol, which is maybe 5-minute interviews, there might be 2 or 3 follow-ups, but you don't have to get through all the follow-ups. You need to make sure that your core answer is as detailed as possible. And if you don't get through the follow-ups, that's fine. You won't lose marks for not getting through follow-up questions. You will lose marks if you're trying to think about the follow-up questions and you're not making your initial statements or initial answers as detailed as possible. I heard that some interviews will act cold or rude towards you in some of my stations to test your resilience or adaptability. Is this true? Usually in role play and communication stations, they might do that. They might do that to see if you're going to like fly off, kind of get angry or respond to them in an angry way. Trying to stay calm through those situations is really important. But in general interviews, so probably in the stations that we're talking about today, it would be very unlikely that an interviewer is going to be purposely acting cold or rude towards you because they're not testing that. Could I please give an example of broad skill for Gibbs and more specific skill for Star? So I don't mean more specific skill, I mean more specific scenario. So if you're talking about a specific time you did something, then you use star because you're talking about a specific situation. But if I'm talking about the general skill of empathy and I want to reflect on how I'm showing empathy in general, then I would use Gibbs, for example. That's the difference. What are the main things that you would get marked on for each question? So quality of your answer, and usually communication skills are the big ones. Core communication will be in every station, but the quality of your answer um, is kind of how for questions like the ones we've discussed today, you'll be marked on things like insight. How much do you show you have an understanding of medicine? How good are the breadth of skills that you've shown or experiences that you've shown? How good is the quality of your communication? How good is the reflection? And how good is your action plan for later on? Would the interviewer cut you off or hint that you shorten the answer if they have a follow-up? Nope, they shouldn't do that. In a panel, they might tell you, okay, thank you, we'll move on to something else, but that usually is a positive. That means that you've kind of ticked off everything that they mentally want you to talk about. And remember, panels are so long that they could ask you about anything. But in MMIs, they probably won't do that because again, they'll allow you to speak more freely. It's a bit more free form monologue. Cool.
I don't think we've got any more questions coming up.
Right.
So on behalf of everybody, I would like to say thank you to Hamza for giving his time in delivering this webinar. I really hope you found it useful. We will be sending via email the recording for everybody. So don't worry if you were dropping in and dropping out or joined late. We will send it to you. And oh, we've got one last question. How will the in-person MMI circuits work, Hamza?
I think that means the Medic Mind ones. I think that's the
Oh,
question.
right. If you go, I think Hamza, if you go onto the next slide, there is a QR code that you can scan. There you go. You can scan it to get onto our website. There is a page dedicated to our MMI circuits. You go on the top on the navigation bar on interviews, and you can find all of our interview supports. So you can have a look at how they work there. And email us with any questions and we can let you know. They're usually either a morning or an afternoon, and you will be there in a small group and you will answer half of the stations and you will listen to the answers on the other half of the stations, and then you can talk about your feedback and you will get personalised feedback on your answers as well. So that's how they work. Thank you everybody for taking the time to join this. Again, we hope it's been useful. It's lovely to see so many of you there. Thank you, Hamza, and hopefully we will see you in the next MMI webinar on the 19th of November.
Thank you very much, everyone. Yeah, hope
Thanks,
that was
Hamza.
useful. Hope it was enjoyable. Yeah, so see you all on the 19th.
Thanks, Hamza. Bye.